All right, welcome back. This is Kevin McCain with Idaho Art Classes and Kevin McCain Studios. We're going to be doing a watercolor today. This painting that we're going to be doing is for my beginning painting series, beginning painting 1, the 8th session. We're going to be doing a small little still life study watercolor, little tangerine on top of a cube. I'm going to basically be using a 1-inch brush, and these are two number 10 rounds. One's a Cotman, is one of the brushes. I don't even know if they still make these. This is the Winsor Newton 239 series. And these brushes are, if you take care of your brush, they'll last a long time. These are 20 years old or more. Same thing with this guy. And again, nice tip on him, even though. So one thing about watercolor, the brushes are more expensive, but a decent brush will last you a long time, especially if you take care of it. I've got some test strips here that we can test our colors on while we're painting. I usually try to keep those close by, and certainly at this point in the class we need to be using those. And the test strips are just, you don't know what your color is till you actually touch it to paper, so we can check it on there before we put it onto our painting. Paper towels. I always want some paper towels. Have some extras here if I need to have them or what have you. So we've got the paper towels there. Brushes here. I got some water over here and just a jug. Very, very simple. In terms of the paint that I'm using, now those in the classes can use several different types of paint, but I'll just go over the colors that I've got on here. For you in the class, we're going to be modifying the hue, the value, and the intensity. Mix your hue first, and then you change the value, and then you change the intensity at the very last. That's the proper way to do it. I may not do that all the time, because I get into my sort of what I'm used to doing. But to begin painting, when you're beginning painting, it's best to first mix up that hue and make it as bright a hue as you possibly can. Then you're going to go ahead and change the value to what the value needs to be, darken or lighten it. And then you're going to change the intensity as the last step. So again, for the colors I've got here, we have a cad yellow light, cadmium medium, actually that's cad deep, yellow ochre, raw sienna, cadmium red light, alizarin crimson, burnt sienna, this is a Theo rose, this is a Theo violet, ultramarine blue, cobalt blue, phthalo blue, I believe this is cerulean blue. It's either cerulean or manganese. I believe that's a cerulean though. Then I've got viridian, and by the way, you can use cerulean or manganese sort of interchangeably. It's just the graininess of the property of the paint is, and its staining strength is the difference between those two colors. Other than that, they're about the same temperature. They're about the same value. We have viridian. We have sap green, hooker's green, Payne's gray, and burnt umber. Hooker's green is named after the person that came up with the color, whose last name was Hookers. So that's why that's called Hooker's green. If you're good enough or do something important enough, they'll name a paint after you. You have other paints sometimes that are called, by people who use them a lot. And that's pretty cool stuff. So again, we're just going to go ahead and we're going to get started now. I've drawn out my little tangerine, and I've drawn out the cube, and we're going to jump right in here. We're going to move it at a quicker click. We're going to move at a quicker pace than I have in previous paintings. So I'm going to start off with my wash. Again, we're doing this very simple. There's like cloth back here, but I'm dropping out the cloth. I have an ivory wall back here, and then I have white tablecloth, cube, tangerine. Again, this is my prerogative. I'm going to make it seem like this has no folds on it. White plain tablecloth, ivory wall, just real simple planes of color. And so I'm going to start off with the wall. Now the wall we said is ivory, and ivory is really just a dull orange. And so I'm going to start off with, I'm using an orange red, an orange yellow, and now we got this really nice intense orange. Well, we don't want that for the wall. That's too bright. And I'm going to change the value. So this is about the value that it needs to be. And then I'm going to dull it. So I'm going to go ahead and dull it with a little bit of brown. Now that's not doing it enough. And so if I'm going to dull it more, I'm going to add a little bit of my Payne's gray. Now I'm going to mix those together. And now I've got this really dull, dull value, and I can try it on my little test strip to see if I like that color. Okay. I'm going to mix a little bit of the orange because I think I lost a little bit too much in the intensity. Try that again. Okay, that'll work. All right, so we're going to really, this is, we want to work as quickly as possible. I've got here the little, I'm not going to work all the way to this is paper tape. It's water activated. I don't want the water butting up against this tape or it'll start to lift off and then my paper will pop off. This is a very, this is stretched. It's very tense. It's actually pulling this board and warping it. It's that strong. So I've made the little borders that I want for my painting. So that way I'm not touching it with water against the tape. So again, I'm going to start off with cutting in. Now I can go outside that a little bit, but I'm just saying when this is going to be matted, we'll mat right up against the lines I've drawn. Okay. And I need to work as quick as possible. Remember, with any area, we don't want to spend any more than, 10-15 minutes tops. And so we have to really work. Now, I can't cut in with that 1-inch brush. It's just too big and cumbersome. So I'm going to transition to my number 10. And I'm going to cut in around this tangerine with this number 10 round. All right. And I have to make sure I don't let any area start to, if it dries out too much, it'll start to create what's called a water line. That is not desirable. We do not want that. So we're going to try to cut in around this as quickly as possible. Keep working the edge, pushing that edge so it doesn't create, again, that water line. Okay. Okay, there we go. Grab the bigger brush. This is creating a water line. As that sits, it'll start to, again, create. Now I gotta be careful that I don't touch that. Like right there, I went into that line of graphite. I probably should have erased that off because what it does when I came off of there is it brought gray into the paint. And so I probably should have erased that a little bit more. I was trying to make it clear, but in hindsight's 2020. It's going to tint my. There's pigment there. The graphite's a pigment and it's gray, and when you do that, it's going to bring gray into the mixture. And so, if you don't want that, you might want to stop just a little bit short. Now again, or I could run over. But right now, I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to try to get as close as I can, and then just stop up just a little bit short, because they could always bring the mat in just a little bit as needed. And now we've got this whole area pretty close to universally covered, or it's wet everywhere. And if I need to darken any area, this would be the time to do it. Now I think this is actually a bit warm. It might even be a little bit dark. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and I'm going to try to see if I can pull out just a little bit of the paint. Pull some of the paint back off of here. You always use your paper towel to check your, to control your wetness, how wet or how dry the paint in the brushes. It's just really easy to control it that way. And again, if I want to, I can start to drop more paint down in here. I'm going to bring a little bit of blue and green in here, because as light moves across the wall, it's going to get less of that orange. It's going to go more neutral, and you'll start to transition across the hues will shift across the color spectrum, and so you start to pick up a little bit of green sometimes and other colors. This is creating a water line, so I need to re-wet this, or I was blotting that, and so I'm going to go ahead and just re-wet this whole area. So again, I don't get a water line, because you blotted out the water, and again, it can start to create a dry barrier that again will make the it just will not be desirable. Leave an edge there as it dries that we do not want. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and re-wet this a little bit. Okay. Now remember, we don't want to work on any area that's wet. And so I'm pretty much done with playing with this. I mean, I could, if I wanted to do some texture or stuff, you could start to drop in little bits of paint, like this. And so, but you got to be careful that it's not too wet, or you'll start to get blooms. Remember, a bloom is where your brush is too wet and the area has gone too dry, and it causes a flood that pushes the pigment aside and starts to look sort of like a blooming flower, hence its name. So if you want to, you could again create small textures that way. A lot of times when you have an edge that meets, that was not what I wanted. Bring some color in here, there we go. So where this will meet the tablecloth, it's going to the table, and then it's going behind the table. And so there'll usually be a little bit of value, a gradation, getting slightly darker as it comes down, and as the light climbs up the wall, the value will get lighter. And so again, we can just drop in a couple of little bits to really strengthen the gradation. This is just dropping into a wet wash. It'll just bleed out. And now I'm just going to leave this alone. For the most part, we've got the beginnings of a gradation, and we'll just let this dry out a little bit. And again, if I was doing something a little more advanced, again, I might create some textures. I think it's a little bit warm, but I also have to reserve judgment, because again, these colors do change as they dry. And so I'm dropping in a little bit of blue, because again, as this starts to shift in value, it starts to shift in color. And so again, the shadows in this has a warm light source. That means the shadows are cool. In other words, they're going to have blue or violet or green. And in this case, as the wall moves across the wall, there's a little bit of blue that starts to show up. And the blue with a little bit of yellow, it starts to kind of feel like it's a green. And that's just because whenever again, the light's not the same all the way across the wall. So as it changes, it's going to change value, so it gets darker, and it's going to change temperature. In other words, this is oranger, and this has just a little bit more blue to that orange. It gives us some variation. Okay, very low intensity though, so that's what we want. We want the low intensity. We're going to go ahead and I don't want to do the orange because it's touching the wet wash. Can't do the top, the top or sides of the cube. It's touching the wash. The tablecloth is white, so we're actually going to leave that white for this. Again, this is only the third color assignment we've done, so we're gonna keep it a little more simple. In the Painting 2 class, we're gonna get a little more complex. We're gonna start dealing with folds. We're gonna start painting stuff a little bit, ratcheting up that difficulty. But for right now, we're just going to go ahead and keep it fair, again, very, very, very simple. The shadows go, again, very, very blue. Now remember, the Payne's Gray is a dull, dull, dull blue, and there's a little bit of violet in there, so I'm adding just a little bit of purple to it. And so I think I'm done with that color for now, so let's clean off. And what we're going to do is we're going to, well, I guess I don't have very much of the cast shadow, so I'm not going to, if I had it longer, I would mix up different puddles of lighter and darker value. With this one, we're just going to go, this will be the lighter one, this will be the darker one. That was too much red, put a little bit more blue in there, pull it back. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to start off with my number 10 round, and we're going to come in here and paint. And we can already see that violet because there was a little bit of that red I brought in here. Don't leave any area too long, or again it will create a water line. So I have to continually expand the shape of the shadow. Like that right there, the little stair step, that'll cause a water line if I don't get in there and, you know, dampen it and move it out, make it larger. So again, we're constantly trying to manipulate these values, constantly trying to manipulate the paint. So now we've wet this all the way down. We're now going to darken it a little bit for the areas we want to. So we're going to come in here and we're going to come in here a little bit. Drop in some of this. Then we're going to go ahead and drop in a little bit more. Alright, so we have just a little bit of a gradation happening. Let's see if we can go ahead, and I think I might, well, no, I think that's actually, well, there's an old adage, if it's the color you want when it's wet, it won't be the color you want when it's dry, because watercolor gets lighter as it dries. So I'm going to go ahead and just darken this a little bit more. I have to keep that in mind. So I jump between mediums, oil and watercolor, and I've worked in acrylic and egg tempera and gouache and casein, and you get to know sort of the quirks of every medium. And one of the quirks of watercolor is it lightens as it dries. One of the quirks of acrylic is it darkens as it dries. So you want to know what's, and that can be, a game changer. Like, you've gone through all the time to get the exact thing that you want, and then it dries you and you're like, wait a minute, so you just learn kind of how to deal with what it is that you're using. So I wanted to pull out, I used a thirsty brush, pulled out some of that, wet it back down again, so again it would bleed a little bit more, just to give me a gradation a little bit into that shadow. Okay. I've pretty much touched all the areas I can while this is wet. So we're going to come back and we're going to go ahead and let this dry. Then we're going to come back and do some of the other areas on here. All right. All right. Let's see if we can. Now remember, if it feels like the same where it's dry and you put your hand there and it feels like the same temperature, then it's dry. If you put your hand there and it's cool to the touch, cooler than the paper you know is dry, that means that's still wet, and you want to be careful with that. Well, this feels a little cool to touch, but we're throwing caution to the wind, so we're going to go ahead and if I had a hairdryer, I'd hit this sucker, but I think we're fine. I think we're dry enough that I don't think we're going to have a problem. So I'm going to start on this side because I know this is drier, this is a little cooler, the touch. So this is dry on this side, but it's a little wet over there. So I'm going to start with the cube. And this is the shadow side. We actually have our light values, middle values, dark values. So we're going to start off with those dark values. And this, pardon me. This is the cube is slightly orange. Now it's a dull orange, and we might be able to go ahead and start with burnt umber. Or I could do that, or I could start with orange, like so, and I could add a complementary color like blue. That's going to dull it considerably. This is probably, I was going to add Payne's Gray to that. You can certainly do it that way, or we could do it a third way where we're going to go, okay, what's the hue? Start with the orange. That's red-orange. We want true orange. We want something that's not too yellow, not too red. And then we would take and add a little bit of Payne's Gray to that, because that will dull it, because the Payne's Gray is blue, this is orange, complements. This is a very, very dull blue, so it will keep it much more neutral. Any of those options or ways are fine. This brown would probably be a little too red, so we'd have to modify it. It couldn't stay by itself. But we're going to go ahead and use this to, I think we got a little bit more blue in this. So I'm going to take a little bit of blue. I'm using a green blue because there's a little bit of green in there. I'm going to see how this looks on my test sheet. Okay, whoops. Well, that's much. I think this has too much blue. I think we'll go with this one. And I'll probably be mixing between the two. I'm going to see how much of this I can cut in with my 1-inch flat. Now, this is important. So I got the Payne's Gray again. I could mix these two together. That will keep it more neutral. Again, that's perfectly valid. I could do the orange and dull it down. That's perfectly valid. Just however we can. That seems like that's a little bit too red. It's sort of on a violet side. So when you say red, I'll say red, and people are like, "What are you talking about?" I'm looking at this and I don't see any red in there. And I'm talking about the fact that the orange had so much blue, and the red went cool, that it went sort of to the purple side, and that's not what we want. We're going to go ahead and try to it's just a little big, so I'm going to grab the other brush and we're going to try it this way. And again, all these edges, we got to be careful. We want edges where it's hitting the next plane. That we want. But we don't want water edges, you know, in these choppy little areas. So we're going to have to re-wet this area quickly. Otherwise, we're going to have, again, just Now, I was choking up on the brush, which is always a bad thing. And so what I had to remind myself is to let go, get a little further back on the brush. That's a good thing. In fact, the further you are down the brush, the more control we'll have. So we have an inclination that if you tighten up on the brush, that all of a sudden you'll have so much more control over it. But it's actually the opposite. I gotta be careful of that, because again, I was choking up on the brush, and that's not gonna help anybody. I need to get further back on it too. Once again, I'm trying to be, the controlling side of you goes, oh, just tighten up on that sucker, little tiny strokes. That might be fine if we're doing just like little tiny areas, like, you know, eyelashes on a ladybug or something. But anything bigger than that, you know, so I'm coming back in this one area to play with it, and I've choked up on the brush a bit. But to do like a longer line, I have to get further back. So that becomes really important as I'm painting this. I've got this water line that's forming there, and it may be too late. So you've got to keep, again, you can't, I should have gotten everything wet and then played with that area. Because once, there's a point at which, once that's, you know, the water is there, and it's created that line, there's no, you can soften it, but there's no getting it out. And so again, with watercolor, you have to be very careful with the water lines and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, see, there's a line there that's never going away now. But that's all right. I'm going to go ahead and mix up some more paint. Again, we'll start with the hue. That's orange. Add a little bit of Payne's gray to it. Cool it down. It's also going to add some blue, so if it's too yellow, it'll go green. If it's got more red, it'll go more violet when I add blue to it. So that's a good thing to be aware of, that, you know, the way things will change depending on what I'm adding to. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and try to get some gradations in here. And it gets there, so we have the dark tones, and we have some of these, it gets a little bluer and a little darker in this corner. And then as it comes down, it gets a little lighter because of reflected light. I need to control some of the color in here. Now remember, if I have a smaller brush, it'll leave more strokes. So now that I've cut in the cube, I'm going to use the bigger brush to try to get some of these subtleties that I need in this cube that I want. And so again, we're going to go ahead and bring in a little more blue in that shadow. And then as it comes down, we're going to start to get a little bit of reflected light. So it's going to get slightly lighter because of reflected light. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make this brush a little thirsty and then pull it out. Pull out some of the paint through the middle. Try to see if I can get some more water to wet this down. So this will flow evenly. Again, I've got this little line. That's from that water line. I told you how you got to be careful, and that's why we have to work quick. But I was able to do it enough so that I can actually work with it. But again, it's always going to be there now. But that's not necessarily, you know, it's not a horrible thing. That's just a thing that we have to be aware of. Again, I've choked up on it, but I'm doing little tiny, again, essentially little eyelashes on ladybugs sort of stuff. We're going to go ahead and maybe just drop in just a little bit more paint, get a little bit more of a gradation happening on this. All right, so we can't play with this because they touch that. So what we're going to do instead, oh wow. I flicked some paint, and we're going to see that one. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do much with it. what you would do on something like that is wait till the end when this is all good and dry, get a razor blade, take it to white, and then if you have to, do some little touch up with this color into the white so that it, you know, disappears. Again, that's just part of watercolor. That's what we have to deal with. So again, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and paint the orange, it looks like. So I'm going to clear this off like so. Now I should also do this while I'm thinking about, so where something touches, like where the cube touches the tablecloth, there's going to be something we call an occlusion shadow, and I might as well do this right now. And it's basically something gets really, really dark when it's where something touches, where it comes together. So again, right here, where this touches the table, there's going to be an occlusion shadow. I'm going to move this over just a bit while I'm going to be working with this occlusion shadow. This again is where the edge of this cube meets the tablecloth. And that means that the cube is touching the tablecloth, and where they come together, that's again an occlusion shadow. And so something like that. Okay. And that wasn't touching a wet area, so that's why we went into it. So now we're going to go into the orange. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit more. At the start of the show is the orange. We're going to make sure we get most of this junk, anything that blue and stuff, which blue is complementary to orange, anything that's not, or like that, this is like this terrible brown I was using. Not terrible, but I don't want it in the orange. So here's what we're going to do. We're gonna mix up some of our colors for the orange. Okay, so we're going to start off with the lighter colors. So we're going to take our we're just going to start with some yellow oranges. Okay, that's going to be yellow orange. I might be able to do it slightly yellower over here. I think we got some gunk in there from this. Take that off. Let's start again. Okay. So get the yellow, get the pretty red. This is an orange red, this is an orange yellow. That will give us the brightest oranges. Okay, we're going to go ahead and mix a true orange. This is still a little on the yellow side. We're going to mix an orange. It's neither too red nor too yellow, which is right about there. And then we're going to start to mix up just a little bit of a red orange right about there. Okay, so these are the light values. And then we're going to go into the shadows. Now we can darken this orange by using burnt umber, because burnt umber is a dark, dark, dark orange. And so we can go ahead and go, all right, we're going to start to have some of these values. I can also mix oranges by, this is sort of an intermediate mixing technique where you use colors that are wider apart or further from each other. So that's a red, but that's a red violet. And then we say, all right, well, let's go ahead and mix that with this yellow. And it's going to give me a darker, duller sort of orange because of the fact that we start off with colors that are much further apart in value. And they look similar to these browns, or these orange browns. I'm going to go ahead and darken one a little bit more. We're going to add a little Payne's gray. The other way of mixing orange when you get really dark is to mix between orange, to mix between purple now we're going for orange, yeah, so we can go ahead and we're going to darken this. So we're going to darken this with this. There's a point at which, you know, we're going to have to start adding a little bit of blue We could either add a bright blue, but that's going to add a lot more paint, and it's going to dull it down much more quickly. And it's not going to darken as much as using Payne's gray. Now when we're this dark, we need to add some yellow, but the yellow is also going to lighten it, depending on whether it's a Hansa yellow or a dye color, or if it's actually a cadmium. This is actually a Hansa, which means it doesn't lighten it like a cadmium would. This would actually make it lighter, and we got to be careful of that. So this is my dark orange. Tested on the test sheet. That's a pretty dark color. And we're going to want some of that, okay? So we're going to go ahead and start off with the lightest color. Now, since it's an orange, I'm probably going to start off, well, not probably, I'm going to just go ahead and start off. Let me clean this up a bit. Okay. I'm going to do one more thing. So this is an opaque color. This is a semi-transparent color. If I use, let's see if I can pull this back over so we can see some of this. If I use a transparent color and a semi-transparent color, even though the colors are a little further apart, this is more orange. This is like a little bit past true red, going into a red-violet. But because it's semi-transparent, no, it's actually completely transparent, and this is semi-transparent. Sometimes you'll get a brighter orange that way, because there's other properties we have to think about and we start talking a lot about those in the intermediate classes, because they are important for us to understand and to be able to use effectively as we work. So let's go ahead and start with this. So we're going to start by, okay, that's probably a little too dark, so we're going to come over here and we're going to start with a little bit of the highlight that we've got going on over here, and this is sort of a little bit in the middle values. And in fact, some of that brown I think is coming out of my brush, so I'm going to go ahead and go straight into yellow, because I think I just went a little bit too. So let's go ahead and start with this yellow. See how bright that yellow is once it comes out of there. Better to be brighter and lighter and then darken later. If you have to go one of those ways, lighter or darker, go, with watercolor we want to start lighter and then build up darker. So I'm going to start off with this color, which is really way too yellow, except in the lightest lights of my tangerine. We're then going to start to bring in some of the oranges, so we're going to start to darken with a little bit of this guy here. Again, so we're going to bring some of this orange into here. I have to keep working. You still have to keep in mind that we don't want any areas that are drying out. So I got to be very, very careful as I bring these around that we don't have any of those areas that are drying out. Okay. And bring this over here. Okay, so these are the lights. So the lights of this are almost done. We're going to go ahead and put a little bit of the middle value where it gets just slightly darker. Okay. On this little tangerine. Now this is cadmium, so it creates a slightly different orange. Okay, so now we're going to go, I think we're going to add just a little bit of red in a couple places. I think we're going to start to look a little bit too, looks more like an orange. Oranges are usually the ones that I see in this part of the country are a little bit more of a yellow orange instead of a true orange. It's once you get to tangerines are usually closer to true orange than oranges are. This is making a water line, so it's time to, we're going to go into the shadows. So we're going to go ahead and get rid of that water line and start to deal with some of the shadows in the tangerine. If I call this an orange, it's not. It's a tangerine. Make sure that's not getting dry too quickly. Alright, so we got this tangerine, and we've just barely got it all the way wet. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start to modify some of this, a couple places. That's a little red. Okay. Okay. Now I can take some of the moisture out of this, and I can, if I need to, I can pull some of this out a couple places. I think along here it can get just a little bit lighter. Pull some of that out. There's some reflected light back here. Again, I can pull a little bit of that out right there. For the reflected light, there's some reflected light down here. I can pull this out for that reflected light. Put some paint back down in there for that quote-unquote reflected light that we're using. We then have some dark tones here. And then we have the core shadow as far as that goes. So we want to go ahead and put in the core shadow for this tangerine. And so I'm going to grab a little bit of this and a little bit of this, and alright, so we're going to go ahead and there's some little bits of value up here we haven't played with. This comes out, goes into shadow, goes into shadow here. As far as that goes. So there's a little bit of shadow back here, a little bit. Not as dark as what was over here. It's getting a little bit dry, so I gotta be like that right there. I gotta be careful. I just dunked this in water, and then I'm taking a lot of the water out, because if I don't, I'm gonna get a bloom in here, and I don't want that happening. Okay. And so let's see if we can soften this just a little bit through there. Okay, I like that a little bit. We're gonna bring this, make this somewhat thirsty, see if we can pull just a little bit more of that out. I like that. I think we're going to put just a little bit more, sort of try to see if we can get a little bit brighter orange in there to drop back in, and then I'm going to pull some back out. And so I've got a few minutes to do this. I don't have a ton of time to do this, but you know, this is where, you know, the rubber meets the road, as the old saying might go. Put some of this in. Now that was probably too wet a brush, so I want to see if I can pull this out without having it become a bloom, because you know, if what happens is, again, is you put too much water there and it creates like a flood, and water tension is enough so that it can push pigment, and so it pushes it away into what looks like, again, a little flower, and we call it a bloom. I'd like to say affectionately, but that's probably not the term that most watercolorists would use when it's happening and they don't want it to happen. Affection is not the word you're thinking of. Probably thinking of all the words you swore you weren't going to use anymore, and during your New Year's resolutions or something. But that's all right. Now again, if there's some areas here that we want to see if we can use, you know, where we're using some absorbency, try to deal and pull stuff out. I've got a paper towel. This is too dirty. I've got to get a clean one. So I got a paper towel here that's also absorbent. So I could come in here in a couple of areas and see if I could pull off just a little bit more paint to give myself just a little bit more value gradations. Okay. And that can be an effective tool while you're painting. I made this almost like a dry brush. And so I'm going to put I pulled a little bit too much out, so I was putting just a little bit more in. Again, I'm loading this brush with this color. I'm going to go ahead and tap it and see if I can get I can go ahead and lay just a little bit more, sort of a middle value here in this area, just a little bit. This got a little bit a little frumpy on there, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to try to get rid of the frumpiness. No frumpiness for this orange, that's for sure. So we're just going to keep on working on this little tangerine just a little bit, and then it's going to be time to leave this alone. So we're kind of there where we need to leave this alone until it dries. All right, so we can't do up here yet because that touches the orange. This is remember our shadow side. These are our light values, our middle values. We have a cast shadow up there. So we're going to first deal with the light values. I'm going to mix up the value for this cube. Now, part of this is going to be, you know, the difficult part is which is lighter and which is darker than the tangerine there. I have the cube is a little lighter, but it's also really dull. So there's, you know, there's sort of a trade-off, if you will. Let's see where we're at in terms of the value on this. Okay, let's go ahead and start off with that. So this is, again, going to be this doesn't have as much intensity as the colors in the orange. Okay. Remember, these are the lightest lights in the cube. As the cube moves, and that's also got to be darker than the wall. So that's the other part of this, is we have to make sure that we're going darker as we move over. You always want to try to pull this brush and not push it. Otherwise it'll open up and it'll throw paint around, and it's never going to be what you, it's just going to make a mess. So don't do it. It's not going to be what you want. Don't do it. So again, we almost got this completely wet, which means that's when we can start dropping stuff in. We can start introducing more strokes into it. We can do a lot more with controlling what this looks like. Okay. All right, so we got this all covered, and now we're going to go ahead. Now again, as it moves and gets closer to the wall, there's always one edge going darker while another edge gets lighter. So even though this is the light value, as this value gets closer to the wall, the value goes slightly darker. So as it moves over this way, it gets slightly lighter. So that's an important relationship that we want to have with this. Now, we're dealing with just the form shadows. We're not going to do detail on this thing. I know everyone, they're like, oh, I want to get to the detail. The detail, it's detail. Detail's so fun. Bring on the detail. Details have to conform themselves to form shadows. So we have light, medium, and dark. If it doesn't, then you're going to be in all kinds of trouble. So again, we're making a little bit of a gradation as this comes over here, and it's looking pretty good as far as that goes. So that's what we want. We want this to again have a little bit of that gradation. So what we're going to do, again, this is still wet. We can't do this or this, so we're going to have to let this dry. So we'll come back and we'll finish this up. All right, so we're going to go ahead and paint in the top. Now there's a highlight between the light value and, whoops, that was water that dropped on there. That's what I get for not thinking about what I'm doing. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to put in the middle value over here. Light, middle, and then dark. We're going to start with our yellow-orange. Whoop, that's too much red. Bring a little bit more. There we go. There we go, that's yellow-orange. And then we need to dull this down. So we're going to add a little bit of brown. That's not going to be enough, so we're going to add a little bit of Payne's gray as well. We could have had purple if you wanted to do a more of an intermediate technique. Alright, I think we need just a little bit more red, maybe just a little bit more yellow. And let's see what we got here for a color. It's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. So let's go ahead and put that in. And again, we're going to go ahead and we go ahead, there's again a highlight, so we use that as a barrier as well, separate these two planes. Okay, now that's all wet. Now again, as this comes back, it's going to get a little darker. As it's lighter up here, it gets darker as it comes against the wall, because again, there's always one edge going lighter while one edge goes darker. So if that's my light edge, this has to be my darker edge. Also, something that will happen with the highlight is right behind the highlight, it'll get slightly darker and then transition, getting lighter again. Alright, so we've got a little bit of a gradation. Now this is going to be our cast shadow. So if it's like, well, wow, this, again, until we get everything covered, it's a little distracting sometimes with watercolor, because all the white paper, you know, tricks our brain into seeing things in a completely different way. And so it's not until we get all the white taken out that we'll leave this, because this is a white tablecloth again. As we get more into the the beginning 2 classes and the intermediate classes, we'd start to actually paint this. But for now, we're going to just keep it white. So we basically have this is our lightest this is the lightest. This is the second lightest. And then between the cube and the orange, they're almost the same value as far as that goes, which is kind of wild. So we're gonna come back in with this. We're gonna play just a little bit more on here and then call this a finished painting. All right. All right, we're back. So we're gonna go ahead and put in the cast shadow here. Again, we have the orange. That's again getting. It's really got a lot of blue in it from. So, and the thing is that in the shadows go blue because we have a warm light source, cool in the shadows. So shadows are going slightly bluer, and so we're going to go ahead and now this will be the lightest. So we're going to wet this down. And this is a small area. Now if you had like a number 5 or number 7 brush, break it out, because this is a 10, so it's a little big. Not that we can't do it, but we have to work a little harder at it. And that's why you have a selection of brushes. Is there's just, if I had like a 5 and a 3 round brush and maybe a 1/2 inch brush, that's going to be pretty much, you could have more brushes, and some people do, but those brushes right there will take you and give you, as just so much more flexibility. It'll really help. It'll basically be all that you need, I guess is what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying it very well, but those brushes would give you all the flexibility that you need for the most part, unless you're doing something that required some sort of specialty brush. Most people aren't doing with watercolor. They're not using tiny little riggers for painting the ropes on ships and stuff like that. And if you are painting ships, well then yeah, you go and you get a rigger. If you're not, well, you don't worry about it. And there's brushes like that where you can use other brushes to give yourself more options, but most watercolors you'll find will use like a number 3 round, maybe they'll have a number 1 round, a number 5 round, a 10 round, maybe a mop brush, a 1 inch and a 1/2 inch, and that's pretty much most all the brushes that they'll have, need, ever gonna want, all that good stuff. And so yeah, if you need, if you need stuff, if you need more stuff, but it doesn't have to be like some long list. Some people just like brushes, and they'll have like 200 brushes. You don't need that many brushes. 1/2 brushes is what most artists are going to use 98 to 99% of the time. And you can get away with it 100% of the time. And I can even get away with just using a flat and a round if I needed to, but if you've got more brushes, again, you've got a little bit more versatility. You've got more options. And there's times where you want more options, where you want to be like, yeah, I got that. I can do that, you know, no big deal. Get out my different brush, what have you. Alright. So again, we've got our little orange here. Actually, it's a tangerine. I think I've called it an orange a couple times. But yes, it's a tangerine, for those who caught that. He keeps calling it an orange. It's not an orange. Yep, you're right. So again, we're going to maybe lighten that a little bit by moving around. Pulled some of it off. What we're going to do now, you know, we're going to call that good for that section. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and do a couple things to finish this off. Now, this highlight is a very hard edge, and what you can do is you can come in here with just a little bit of water and wash around that edge to pick up some of the paint. Just to soften it so it's not quite so, it just looks a little too sharp. And so again, we can come in here and pull some of that off. Just a bit. Not getting rid of it, we're just softening it up a bit as far as that goes. Some people, if they wanted to, they could get in here. If you're really excited, you could come in here with a little bit of, if you're trying to deal with some texture on here, you could come over and do some little stippling to try to create very quickly. You gotta be random with this or it starts to look like freckles. But you could just start to put in, again, little bits, little tiny touches. They're supposed to be, you know, little bits of pigment, pores that are on that tangerine. Again, you got to be careful sometimes with that. You don't want it to all be the same. But you can do some things like that just to give it a little indication. The other thing we're going to do is, with this, like this, we lost some of the highlight here. We still have that blemish. I'd come in here where there was a razor blade and take that off, take that out. Scrape this with a razor blade to get some of the line back in. You know, in some areas, again, that's part of the finishing touches on watercolor. Sometimes people don't talk enough about it. This little bit up here, that's where it touched came off the tree. We want to come in here and, you know, it's just this flat green, and we want to give just a little hint to some of the, you know, fact that it's a little bit in shadow. Just a scotch and all that sort of stuff. We did that. That's nice. You know, this is starting to, again, feel like it's got a finished quality to it. We come in here. Nope, needs to be a little darker. And again, there's a little bit where these touch that are sort of occlusion shadows, and again, we could come in here and deal with those little occlusion shadows a little bit. On there. A little bit goes a long way on stuff like that. So we're going to go ahead and call this done. So I want those in my class to go ahead and try to create this painting, and you know, try to do as good a job as you possibly can. We want light, medium, and dark for the form shadows, cast shadow. We have reflected light here. We have light values, middle values, highlight, core shadow, dark tones, reflected light. If I wanted to try to darken this again, we could for the core shadow. I'd re-wet this whole area and then just introduce the darker darks along the core shadow. That would give it a little more pop, as people say. but this already has, you know, a nice little quality to it. So again, we want you to go ahead and give this a shot. And again, for those that are in the my watercolor class, I'll be sending you the reference that you can paint from, and then you can watch the video, you can paint along with the video, check out the reference, you know, and you know, if you got any questions, contact me. All right, so this has been Kevin McCain with Idaho Horror Classes and Kevin McCain Studios. Go ahead and get out there, be more creative, and we'll catch you later. Bye-bye.